So I'm in the middle of a build-off between two very different engines, and they're both being installed in 2000 Chevy Silverados. One of them is this little 4.8 LR4. This is going to get installed into my Stepside Silverado single cab, and the other engine that we're building is a 547-inch Gen 7 big block, and that's going to wind up in UglyTruck. That's my other 2000 Silverado, the extended cab two-wheel drive. Eventually, both engines are going to be kind of on the same level. On the UglyTruck, I have a goal of originally I said 1,000 horse at the wheels, but I kind of realized for all the expense and effort that we're going through to produce that much power with a big giant big block, I really need to make more horsepower. So we're making a few slight changes to that build recipe, and I'll kind of show you those when everything gets back from the machine shop. But I'm hoping we'll have an engine that's capable of at least 1,500 horse, if not even a little bit more. Because we're going all out, and I want that truck to be just I want it to be kind of stupid. Now, the Stepside here, that's about a year behind the UglyTruck in terms of its development. But eventually, I do want it to have a similar power number. Maybe this one is going to be a little more street friendly, a little bit more conservative. But the cool thing about these two different builds is they are in two totally different styles. I mean, not only are the power plants, they couldn't be on different planets. We've got a short stroke, high revving, high RPM small block against a big stroke, huge torque big block. But then the rest of the trucks, well, those differences don't stop there because, like I mentioned, the UglyTruck is an extended cab two-wheel drive, and that's going to be built kind of more like a dedicated drag rig. I think eventually, or at first, I wanted to build it more I wanted it to be my Big Red. You know, the Big Red Pro Touring Camaro that was built in the early 2000s. That's kind of like a one-car-does-all situation. They do autocrossing with it. They do road racing. They do salt flats. They do top speed stuff. And that was my first plan, was let me build a truck that'll do everything. But the further I get down the path with this big, giant, big block, the more I'm thinking that one is going to be kind of like a dedicated drag truck. So I've got a bunch of suspension parts that I'm going to be showing you guys today that I will install over the course of this winter. That's going to make that truck put down its massive amount of horsepower, hopefully a little bit better than it does right now. But we have the Stepside project here, and if you guys remember, probably a month and a half ago, I scored some used parts, and we're actually going to be converting the Stepside into an all-wheel drive. All-time all-wheel drive with this. It's an NV149. It's an all-wheel drive viscous coupled transfer case, and it sends something like 34% of the power up front and the other, 36 up front, 64 out back. I think that's the split. We've got ourselves an all-wheel drive front differential, which is the same thing as the four-wheel drive, except it has a solid passenger side axle shaft. So anyway, that's what we're doing in terms of the rest of the drivetrain on the Stepside, but I do have a few suspension parts that I'm also going to show you for the Stepside. So over the winter, we have two completely different suspension builds. So today I'm just going to kind of walk you through what our plans are and how we're going to modify both of these trucks to better put down a little bit more horsepower than they currently are. Remember, UglyTruck, that's my drag truck. And it is two-wheel drive, so we're going to focus mostly on the back end. And then because this is going to be all-wheel drive, well, we have some options for all four corners. So got a bunch of stuff that showed up here, so let's get to it. So the extended cab truck is kind of going to be like the drag racer. In the single cab, I think we're going to go a little bit different direction. We're going to have something that'll be at home, going around a corner, maybe on an autocross track. I don't know if I'll quite call it a pro touring truck, but it's definitely going to be more of a corner carver than the UglyTruck is, because that's going to have like a 15-inch drag wheel out back and some skinny tires up front, where this will have more of a square setup, wide, low-profile tires all the way around. But because it's all-wheel drive, it'll still hopefully put down power and launch well in a straight line. So the suspension that we're going to be doing on this, it all revolves around replacing the front torsion bars. These IFS trucks from 1988 on up, they use torsion bars on the front end, which is a pretty good spring, but you're very limited in terms of spring rate and tuning and adjustment and things like that. And a coil-over conversion is really where it's at. Now, it is a little bit difficult to do a coil-over conversion on a four-wheel drive IFS, torsion bar front end, but Atomic Fab and Performance, Richard Wayne, I think, is the name of the guy that runs it. He makes suspension parts for these trucks, and he has a coil-over conversion kit And now, so do I. He sent me one up, and this is kind of the basis of the suspension upgrades that we're going to be doing on the single cab. So it all is based around a Viking coil-over shock, and he measures these all out, so you just kind of tell him what ride height you want, and he'll build you a setup to match that. So we've got the coil spring, we've got the coil-over Viking shock. This is his lower bracket that'll adapt a factory-style control arm to work with a coil-over. We got a different bump stop, and this is the upper frame mount that actually is going to allow this coil-over shock assembly to mount and hold up the weight of the truck. The spring rate, he specs all that stuff out, so you just kind of tell him how high you want the truck, and that's what you get. I did tell him I was going to run a 3-inch total drop, but out of that I only wanted 1 inch of the drop to come from the springs or the coilovers, because I also have a set of Beltec drop spindles that we're going to be installing up front. So 3 inches in the front and a total of, well, let's see, you'd call it a 2-4, 3-4 drop, but because we took out the lift block in this already, it'd be like a 6-inch drop. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bolt-on drop hangers from the UglyTruck and I'm going to put them on this one. So it'll be a total of 6 inches of drop from where it was a 4-wheel drive truck, but if it were 2-wheel drive it would be more like a 4-inch rear drop. But anyway, out back we also have a few other changes that we're going to be doing to make this once again handle a little bit better. Along with the parts I grabbed from the Denali, I also grabbed a rear sway bar. These are a pretty easy thing to adapt to the rear end of a pickup truck. So I'll make a few brackets and we'll get the rear sway bar on. That'll kind of help handling a little bit. And then for the back, we're also doing some atomic Fab Shocks. So he sent me the brackets. These are I believe this is the axle side here. I believe this is the frame side, although I might have that backwards. And we're also going to be running some Viking Performance shocks out back, but these are a smooth body because there is no need for a coilover out back. They are double adjustable, which will help great to dial in the ride quality and the handling and stuff like that, both for the rear and for the front. They're both double adjustables. And that kind of in a nutshell is the suspension that we're going to be doing on the Stepside. So the goal is something that's a little bit lower, not slammed, because this is an all-wheel drive setup and I do want the CV angles to be fairly conservative, and something that'll handle. So that's the deal here. But on the UglyTruck, we're going a completely different route with a drag style suspension. So the rest of the parts that you see here are going to help the UglyTruck extended cab put down a lot of power to the rear ground, hopefully pull off an amazing launch and run really fast down the quarter mile. Remember, it's a drag truck and I want this thing, eventually I'd love to get well into the 8s and maybe crack a 7. That's probably a year in the making because we got a lot of other work to do on the truck besides the engine. But over the winter we'll definitely have enough horsepower to make that happen. But we're talking about suspension today, and one of the most important parts about a drag style rear suspension is something that you can tune the shocks, having compression and rebound adjustability. That way you can make it squat down and hook up and take off. Whatever, you know, you want some adjustability. I'm by no means a drag truck expert, but I will be by the time we get there. So anyway, we need some rear shocks. And on the Silverados, on the passenger side, the rear shock is in front of the rear axle. And on the driver's side, the shock is behind the rear axle. No idea why they do it that way. I'm sure it kind of spreads the load out and gives you a nice smooth ride and good handling. But I am going to be relocating both shocks behind the axle, and we're doing so with another kit from Atomic Fab. This is the same exact kit that we're going to be running on the rear of the Stepside, actually, so I have 2 kits in total. We're using the same Viking Performance adjustable rear shock, so we can tune in compression and let the rear end of the truck just kind of squat down and do its thing. The kit does come with brackets for both sides. I think these long ones, like I said, these are the axle side. The short ones, I think, are the frame side. They go right on that cross member that sits right behind the rear axle. On the UglyTruck, I did ask for these shocks to be just a little bit shorter because, well, we're going to be lowering it down. Right now, the extended cab is on a 2-4 drop with shackles and hangers out back and a drop spindle up front. I am going to be going lower on the back. I'm going to go to a flip kit, so we're taking off the bolt-on hangers. We're going to put them on the step side. I have the stock hangers to return onto the extended cab truck, and we're going to be putting the axle above the spring pack for a 6-inch total drop from stock. Now, to get it that low, I am going to need more clearance because right now, even with only a 2-4 drop, the rear axle is like 1 inch from the frame. So I do need a C-notch, and instead of a bolt-in one, which I'm really not crazy about, I went on eBay and I found this company. They're called Overkill, I think. It's not the Overkill that makes the monster trucks, but it's Overkill something or other. They're just a store on eBay, and they're plasma cut out. It's a weld together setup, so you have 2 plates for either side of the frame, and they have these cool little plasma cut lines in here, so you can kind of fold this and then weld it all back together. So it's going to completely box the frame 360 degrees, and the top of the frame is kind of like right here, so the C-notch does go up, but this is designed to fit below the stock bed floor. So the reason why I want to do this style of notch is because this extra reinforcement up here, well, it's just going to make it a little bit stronger. So that's how we're going to get the back end down, is a flip kit, C-notch, and shocks. And then on the front of UglyTruck, this cool little bracket right here, this was sent to me by from Tyler from DTR Fab, and he makes these cross members for the front of the 99-07 Silverados that go underneath the engine. And because I have a 8.1 swap, the stock cross member that goes straight across won't fit because that 8.1 oil pan is pretty massive. But I asked Tyler to send me just the end bracket so I could build my own cross member, and that's what he sent me. These appear to be laser cut, which is honestly quite a bit nicer than a plasma cut part. But same thing, we'll kind of fold this up. These 4 holes, that's a through bolt. This little tab kind of is laser cut to index in there. And then all I'll have to do is find a round piece of tube to kind of come out and bend around the oil pan and go to the other bracket. So we've got one for each side. So that'll help reinforce the front. And then for the engine mounts, this is from Atomic Fab. This is a cool custom motor mount. And this is way stronger than the stock ones because I actually have over here, these are the stock 4.8 motor mounts from the Stepside, but this is more or less what I built my 8.1 swap around, is a stock mount like this. Now these can wear out over time. These particular ones, they're okay because they were attached to a no power 4.8, but anyway, over time these can actually kind of wear out. That rubber will degrade and just flop around. And this is the exact mount that I have holding the 8.1 into the UglyTruck, except this top left bolt here is just spaced out by, it was like 1.5 inches. So anyway, I gave the dimensions to Richard at Atomic and he built me these. Once again, it's an 8.1 side motor plate and a 5.3 frame side mount, and it has this polyurethane bushing in here. So it's definitely going to be a much more durable part, and it should be a direct bolt-in for my conversion. Last but not least, what's in this box? This is really kind of going to be the main ingredient that's going to help the UglyTruck stick to the ground. So let me get this unboxed. So if you want to go quick in a straight line with a leaf sprung vehicle, you got to have traction and you got to control axle wrap, because both of those things are a pretty significant problem on a high power rear wheel drive leaf sprung application. Now in the diesel world, for example, they run something called a long bar, which is basically just a long bar with Heim joints at either end. One of them bolts to the bottom of the axle and one of them bolts onto the frame. And basically all it does is fight against that twisting motion or the axle wrap, and it helps kind of push the truck forward. Now that's great, but a long bar really does nothing to improve the traction of a leaf sprung vehicle. It just stops axle wrap. So long bars were out. The next thing that I thought about building was some sort of a torque arm, which is basically a long arm that is welded solidly to the rear axle, but it has a pivot shackle up front. Now that'll kind of do the same thing as a long bar, but with a little better geometry. It'll just help stop that axle wrap. But once again, a torque arm doesn't really do a whole lot in terms of planting the rear tires into the ground. There's a couple designs. Speed Engineering, I think, makes one, and I would call that kind of like a Caltrac knockoff. I'm not saying they stole their idea, but it's the same similar design where it bolts to the bottom of the axle and it has a little snubber that pushes up against the bottom of the leaf spring and it pulls down on the front spring just a little bit behind the front pivot. Now, there's 2 or 3 companies making that style, but you do have to drill a hole in the front of the spring pack, which I didn't really want to do that. So to me, it only makes sense to go to the original, the OGs, and that's Caltrac. They've been making traction devices for leaf sprung cars for a very long time, and they've been proven to work, and they have many, many fast leaf sprung cars running Caltracs. So that's what I'm going to do. Stock rear leaf springs, I'll take out the overload, and then we're going to be running a set of these. I did order them for a rear flip kit, so they have the bracket right here that sits below the leaf spring. You can kind of picture the spring sitting right here. there's this bar that's kind of adjustable and it goes up towards the front of the spring. And this is really where the magic of CalTracs happen. So first you've got to start by removing your leaf springs and pressing this aluminum bushing in place of the stock rubber bushing. And then you have this sleeve here. This is where the spring pivot bolt goes on. And you can kind of see that goes right through the spring pivot there. And then that also keys into the front of the CalTrac bracket. It's a tight fit because it's powder coated, but basically that goes in right there. And this is what the whole bracket pivots from. So under acceleration, basically you have the axle is going to want to twist, which will push the bar forward. That pushing motion gets to here, where it then turns on this pivot here. So we have a pushing motion that gets pivoted and it gets, well, twisted kind of like that. And then you have this little snubber right here. This is designed to contact the leaf spring. And when it does, it's going to push the leaf spring down into the ground, in effect pushing the tire into the ground and giving you more traction. Along with the CalTrac kit, I also grabbed some U-bolts and a spring perch, and that's going to essentially be my flip kit. So I can put the axle on top of these springs instead of below it where it currently is, which will get the truck lower and allow me to bolt these in place. So that's kind of my setup, guys. We have 2 trucks worth of suspension here. We have a drag style, what I'm considering drag style, and then we have more of a comfort / handling / not quite pro touring setup for the all-wheel drive truck. Remember, these are 2 totally different builds, 2 totally different directions, but when they're done, they're both going to be high powered and they're both going to be a whole lot of fun. And I mean, long-term future, I have a plan. I want to get both of these trucks on the drag strip side by side to compare all-wheel drive versus 2-wheel drive, small motor versus big motor, you know, small block, big block, and 2 different kinds of suspension, because I think way down the road, I am going to 4-link the Stepside here. That's my plan, guys. All this stuff's going to go on as soon as I get my... Actually, I don't know what order I'm going to do this all in, because as you can see, I've got a million parts. I'm building in a million different directions right now, but over the winter, both of these trucks are going to be transformed. I'll probably do the all-wheel drive conversion first on the Stepside, and then I'll get to the coilovers and stuff like that. But that's what you have to look forward to. I apologize. Stepping on parts again. I apologize, I didn't get to any work this weekend. I have some stuff going on, so I have to be out of town. Didn't have a whole lot of time, but just the same, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it, and I hope you guys are excited for what we have to come. Do me a favor if you don't mind, click the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and finally, drop a comment down below. I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching.